Good evening. We're going to call to order the joint session of the Planning Commission, HRA, and City Council. It's 6:15 on October 18th, and I'm going to turn it over to Executive Director Stark of the HRA.
Thank you, Chair Supple and City Council members and Planning Commission members. Tonight, we're here to get an update from MWF Properties on their proposal for the city garage site. That's a site between Pillsbury and Pleasant on 77th Street, where obviously the old city garage was once located. We had a very similar work session to this a few years ago, and based on that, in 2019, the HRA did approve a development agreement with MWF. And perhaps we'll cover that a little bit more further in the presentation. But really, our MWF had approached staff even a couple of years before that. So I would say MWF has been evaluating this property probably for 4 or 5 years at least. With the change in the economy, with the kind of halt that COVID put to development for a little bit, and with the fact that they did not receive funding for low-income housing tax credits, the proposal that they had before was kind of put on hiatus. And they really, I think, just wanted to revisit this with you. See, we've had some changes at the policy maker level, changes in the people involved. And they wanted to see if there was still support for the project that they've been proposing. So with that, I don't think Housing and Redevelopment Manager Urban has anything else to add. So we will turn it over to Ryan from MWF Properties to take us through a proposal. If you can make sure his mic is on.
Hello. All right. Thank you very much. And hello, everyone. You said I'm Ryan Schwickert with MWF Properties. Chris Stoka had done this with everybody 2 years ago, but he's overseas on, he's in the National Guard and he was deployed for 6 months. So I'm stepping in for him. So hopefully he makes it back and he can kind of take this back up. But for the time being, I'm here. And so hopefully I can do my best to, get through this presentation. But this has kind of been his baby for the last 5 years. So I'm kind of stepping in just in the short term. As was mentioned, this is a project that we looked at 2 years ago. This presentation is going to be pretty similar to that presentation, but we'll highlight some of the changes that have happened in the last 2 years and kind of what we're, requesting from you guys, and also, the vision we have for this project moving forward. So the outline of this presentation is up top. We'll, just go through the development team in some detail and then go through some specifics of the development itself. Then have a time for Q&A at the end. MWF Properties is a development company. We've been around since 1999, and our development team, for the most part, includes Eagle Building Company and Valair Property Management. Valair Property Management has the same ownership as MWF. Their office is in our office, so we're by them all the time and in constant communication with them, which I think is important. If there's ever issues that arise, they're right there. Eagle Building has similar ownership relationships as MWF. So for the most part, we're pretty close with all three companies. All three companies are headquartered here in Richfield. And this project is like 2 blocks from where our office is, which is pretty cool. So this kind of gives you some background on our company. We have over 2,100 units developed. We're long-term owners. We've not sold a property. Actually, that's wrong. We just sold one, but that was due to an issue with our investor on the first project we developed back in 2000. So I don't want to say a lie, but that's the only one we've sold, but that was for reasons that, it was an anomaly, I guess. So our vision is to hold all of our properties long-term. And like I said, we're headquartered here in Richfield. Repeat business is important to us. If we build a project in the community, we like to go back and develop more projects in those communities. And this kind of shows the fact that we've had success in certain communities and cities have been willing to work with us on additional projects just from the product that we put forth the first time around, which I think is important to highlight there. Eagle Building Company built 26 of our projects all since 2012. Like I said, they're headquartered here in town. And these are just some of the recent projects that we've done with Eagle, and then our management company, Valair, currently manages all of these projects. So I try to give a little difference between, the flat roof, pitch roof, 3, 4-story, different type of architecture that we use on these. We want to provide some interior photos just to give you an idea of what these projects would look like. So I'll just kind of go through these. You can see kind of some of the finishes that we have and appliances, community room. So talking a little bit about Valair, as I mentioned, they manage all of our projects. Corporate leadership, 9 years of combined experience, and they're also headquartered in Richfield, same office as us. We started Valair back in 2014, I believe, and the woman who's our vice president is someone we brought in from a different management company in South Dakota, and she's worked in affordable housing her whole life, and a lot of the people under her have also worked in affordable housing their whole life. So it's been a pretty easy transition. And like I said, the benefit of having an internal management company is having them right there next to us in case anything happens. We're constantly in communication, and I think that's really important. We like to conduct grand openings before we open our projects and get the community involved. We work a lot with the police department before projects open to kind of talk about, who's our property manager, who are the contacts for the site, if there's any issues that happen, like these are the people that you can call, and we just kind of try to get ahead to make sure that, we're doing our best to make this a safe and good environment, I guess, for all of our residents. So a development summary. So this is probably what you guys are mostly looking at, I guess, kind of seeing the specifics of the project. So the project that we brought forth to you 2 years ago was called a 9% tax credit. We submitted funding to Minnesota Housing for a competitive 9% tax credit. That project did not move forward, and the location of the site, I guess, is not competitive in our opinion for applying again. So that means we're applying for bonds through the state of Minnesota, and we'd pair those with a 4% tax credit. And to keep it simple, the difference between the two is that you get a lower amount of tax credits for the project. It's a little easier to receive those tax credits. The 9% is a lot more competitive. And the location of the project is very important to getting those. But for the bonds and the 4% tax credit that we're going for, the tax credit isn't as lucrative, but we think there's a higher chance of us getting the financing necessary. So the result of it not being as a lucrative tax credit is that the benefit of the credit to us and to the project is lower. So we have to fill that financing gap with other sources, which, as you'll see in a second, is why we are looking to request tax increment financing and a land write-down in some capacity for this to move forward. As you can see in front of you there, the highlighted income brackets are the maximum income levels for a household that would qualify to live in our project. The amount of dependents that household has, the larger their income can be. The reason being, if you have if you have 3 dependents in your household, an income to support 3 dependents is going to be higher than an income to support no dependents. Obviously, more mouths to feed, more things to purchase. So that's kind of why they have a range there of incomes. But depending on the household size, that's the most money the household can make. And then below, you see circled, is the maximum amount of rent we can charge, and that includes a utility allowance. So we have our tenants pay for electricity. There's a utility allowance of anywhere from $40 to $70, depending on the bedroom size. The rent we charge plus utility allowance cannot be higher than that amount that I have circled there. And then I also want to point out too that we are going to have 30% units set aside for persons with disabilities. And I guess while we're at that too, just make a point that utilizing universal design, all the units will be visitable, and 5% of our units will be type A ADA units. Then on-site manager, caretaker, and maintenance, I think is important. Someone's always going to be on site, I guess, to help tenants with any issues. We like to bring this up just in case, people always ask who's living here. And the point of, the type of product we're building, it's called low-income housing, workforce housing, affordable housing. But at the end of the day, it's just working class people that are paying a little more in rent than they're making. And it's just a way to kind of ease that burden to those households. So, a lot of people at neighborhood meetings and a lot of people who complain about this type of housing, they would qualify to live in the housing. So I think there's a negative connotation about, who's living here, but it's just normal everyday people that are living at our apartments. So I'd like to point that out. That might be not as big of a deal in this project because it's kind of surrounded by more commercial uses, but a lot of times we'll be in, single family home areas and we'll get a lot of neighborhood pushback. So we'd like to bring this up too. Location, you're aware of the location, right off 494 there. Our headquarters is, like I said, right down the street. So it's very close. There's a preliminary site plan for the project. This is obviously open to feedback from you guys, and this is by all means not set in stone, but just something to get us started. Some of the project features, like I said, on-site management, community room, fitness center, secure access. This wasn't meant to be one at a time. Sorry about that. You can read them for yourself. So there will be a number of amenities and features, I think, that are important to highlight here. Let's see. We looked at our 108 Place project. This would be Lexington. Oh, what project is this? Lexington Flats. This is our project in Eagan that we just built this summer. That would be kind of a similar rendering. 108 Place is in Bloomington. That's also a similar 4-story flat roof, but that is a different project. So this kind of gives you an idea of the elevations and what the project would look like. Again, open to interpretation and feedback on color and whatnot. So location benefits, it's a high demand area, access to transit, adjacent to multiple roadways right off 494. It's easy to get to different parts of the metro from this location. And, like I said, close to our headquarters, we're close by if anything happens, easier to oversee the construction of it, the management of it when it's right down the street. So benefits to the community, like I said, 2 units are set aside to 30% of the area median income and are for persons with disabilities. The type A units with roll-in showers. With feedback from the HRA, we talked about utilizing larger bedroom sizes to accommodate larger families. So 15 of the units will be 3-bedroom. All units are capped at 60% AMI, and I kind of explained to you the rents and the income levels for 60% AMI on an earlier slide. And with this project, we'd have to agree to a 30-year affordability period with the state. So that's another thing that I think is important to highlight. We're not just going to flip this into a market rate building. We are long-term holders. We have to agree to hold it for 30 years as an affordable housing project. So those income levels will remain affordable for 30 years. All right, I'm trying to think if I need to go into this. I kind of explained to you guys the financing and how that's changed from the 9% to the 4%. We also will be deferring $800,000 of fee, which essentially means that fee is kind of lost because it doesn't get to us up front. It comes out of cash flow. So I think it's important to know that we also are contributing a sizable amount, I guess, to this project to make it work. And then the last thing, to make this feasible, like I said, we'll be looking for tax increment financing and potential land write-down. And that's necessary to fill the gap due to increased construction prices and due to the fact that the financing we're looking for is not as lucrative as what we were looking for 2 years ago. But the increased construction pricing has also been a factor in that. Let's see. Yeah, below are just examples of other financial support we've received for tax credit projects in the past. So most of the projects that we get awarded and financed have some component from the city in terms of financial contribution. That's always pretty important, I guess. So here's a preliminary schedule. We looked for a development agreement to be signed in December, apply for bonds in January, close in May, and then complete construction in spring of 2023. So yeah, that's the schedule. That was kind of long, so sorry, but I kind of want to go through everything in detail, and now I can answer any questions that you'll have.
Are there any questions that people have or comments? All right, Commissioner Pinn?
Thank you. I guess I have a question. I may have missed, why was the original proposal ultimately rejected or fell through?
So Minnesota Housing, for 9% tax credits, there's about 20 scoring categories, and a quarter of them are site specific. A quarter of them are how you're building the building. A quarter are the rents and income levels. And a quarter of them are how much local contribution you received. And the site characteristics, we thought were competitive, but the combination of everything else, our project did not score as high as other projects that submitted for financing. There are ways we could have gone back and made it more competitive, I guess, after the fact, potentially more, local contribution from the city or the county. But every year the scoring mechanism changes, which makes it even harder. So you can't just not get awarded funding and then, try to tweak something, because a lot of times the scoring will change and certain things that are competitive are no longer competitive year over year. And Minnesota Housing updates that every year. So it makes it tough as developers to, find a site and tweak it. We have to find a site, submit an application that will be, highly ranked in the competition for who's applying for them. And we usually do a pretty good job. We have a pretty high success rate in that field. But sometimes we, just don't have the most competitive application. So it didn't move forward. And then the scoring changed, which made this location not competitive last year and this year, I guess. Maybe in a year or two it changes and it's competitive again. But right now that 9% tax credit, we don't think will be achievable right now.
Just a quick follow-up to that. Was the land write-down part of the original proposal too? The request for the land write-down?
I believe, was it?
I can answer that.
Okay.
Yeah, so what the deal at that time was, the HRA would be paid for the land, the $700,000 appraised value, through tax increment. So we would get paid back over time. So it was actually a really, really good deal for the HRA because of those 9% credits. We're putting so much into the deal.
Great, thank you.
Other questions, comments? All right, Commissioner Regan Gonzalez?
There was a slide in there that said there was replacing 600 and something NOAA units in 2017. What units were those?
You were talking about the crossroads at Penn, converting to
okay.
the concierge.
I thought that was
Yep.
before then. Got it. Thank you. And then I just wanted to go back. I think essentially, I can't remember exactly the layout, but I think it was like the same layout for the building. Was it the same number of units back when the first proposal came around, and it looked essentially the same?
Yeah. It's very similar site plan unit mix as we had initially. And Minnesota Housing, in their 9%, it's more competitive with the more 3 bedrooms that you have, which actually worked out good for this because we were told that 3 bedrooms were something they were trying to target. So we kind of just thought the same unit mix would make sense this time around. And really, for these 4% deals that we'd be looking at, there isn't a cap of units for the 9% tax credit. You can only do so many units because they only have so many credits per project. For what we're going in now, it's kind of capped, or what we're going in now, there is no cap, but since the land is only so big, we're kind of restricted to the density. And that's another thing I wanted to kind of talk about today too, was, you know, if not only would you guys be on board with this project, but with the zoning, would you be on board for the zoning such that 55 units would be, you know, would be adequate? So that's something I kind of also was hoping to talk about.
Commissioner, Chair Supple, could I just finish my last comment? Okay, so I think this site is a very hard site to figure out what to do with, and we went through the Richfield Bloomington Honda's proposal, and it was pretty straight across the commissioners and the council. That would have opened up parking, surface parking in all other areas across the city. So that was voted down as an option. That couldn't just be open to Richfield Honda, it'd have to be open to others. So, you know, this housing development, and I think it's hard because there's not space, and we had this discussion years back, there's not space for that community feel. It's not in a great location. There's, you know, not good amenities there because the site is so small. So I guess I'll just say I struggle with that site, period. I don't have a straight answer. I just know that's a site that I struggle with personally.
Other questions, comments? Commissioner Freeze Daniels?
Yeah, I'm still very supportive of housing going here. As someone who lives on a busy street, I think like being close to transit and on the busy road actually is great amenities. I'm curious about the financials though. So originally you said it was 700,000. Do we have any idea about what the numbers would be? Would it that the TIF funding would be for, or what we would do a write down for?
We don't at this point. We decided to wait and get, you know, just get some feedback. We don't like to send a developer down a path spending money like that. If, you know, you were gonna come back saying, you know, as the mayor explained, you know, that we're not super excited about this for housing, or, you know. So no, we don't. In the previous proposal, it is currently a redevelopment TIF district, and so the clock had started running, so we lost a couple of years. The problem is we can't continue down that path because it's been 5 years since the building was demolished, and so we lost that time frame. So we will have to create a new housing TIF district, and so that means the numbers will be different. So, I mean, we can sort of make an estimate. It's going to be around 700,000 again, maybe, but we'll really have to relook at the numbers to know for sure. And values have gone up too since then, so.
Councilmember Whalen?
I would echo the comments about, I also support housing there. I think we're at a position where we need housing, and I don't think we can be too picky in a fully developed city. My main question was, I could be misremembering, but I thought the original proposal had a mix of income levels, and I thought that made it a very strong proposal. I know that we've had several different conversations, I think with all three of these groups, where we've talked about, one, that we like a mix of income levels, and two, that the housing stock we currently have heavily emphasizes the 60% AMI range. And that personally, I would love to see, and I don't know how this impacts the financing you're applying for, but would love to see like 5 of each level of unit to be at 80% AMI, but also 5 of each level of unit to be at 30% AMI. And I'm guessing that's not numbers you can run off the top of your head, but just would express support for that mix of income levels, that I think generally the community has been more comfortable with that.
That's a good question. The reason we landed on 60% is kind of what you alluded to. We would like to do lower income levels in a mix, but due to the increased construction costs happening and the reduction of the benefit of the tax credit by going from the 9 to the 4, this was ultimately the only way we could make the project work, was with some sort of tax increment financing, land write down, and then having the 60% rents, which is unfortunate, but that's just the reality of it, which is why, you know, we're laying this all out to everyone today and explaining that that's really the only way that we can make this work. And if that's something that you're not comfortable with, then that's fine. But that's unfortunately all. Certain costs are, set in stone, and there's only so many things we can change, and the rent levels isn't something we can change. But we will have 2 units set aside at 30% and set aside for persons with disabilities. So we can look at, it's called income averaging, where we look at maybe doing some 80% units and then 50% units. And then the combination of that gets us still to an average rent of like a 60% unit. That's certainly something we can look at. And we'd have to talk to our investor. The people that purchase the tax credits ultimately are the ones who look at that and see if they're comfortable with that type of, I guess, underwriting. So that's something I can look into and get back to you on.
And I would add that I'm very excited about 15 3-bedroom units at 60%, that is more affordability than I think we have. And so I'm excited about that. But I also know, despite having been through a pretty big development boom in the last few years, that they still, I'm not remembering my numbers, we may still be in single digits of 30% units that have been created. And so that's just such a hard resource that, or amenity to get, that certainly the 2 are very appreciated, and that's more than many projects. But even if it literally was 2 more, that still, I think, would be worth exploring.
Yeah, okay. I'll make note of that. And
Ryan, can I ask, with the 4% credits, a mix of income, you aren't as competitive, right? So 4%, the 4% bond credits used to be not that competitive. You could just go in and get them, and they've become competitive. And there's priority. So preservation projects get a first priority, and then 30% AMI, then 50%, and then 60, is a lower priority. How does the income averaging, can
Yep.
you even score with that? I mean, you used to have to score, and now you kind of do.
no, that's a good question. There's 2 things, or 2 ways to answer this question. The first thing, the tranche, I guess, is based upon income averaging. So with the tax code changes from 2017, that was something that was incorporated for affordable housing, was an income averaging. And you can do what you suggested, but a lot of investors, since it's a new tax code change, the IRS hasn't issued guidance on how that's accounted for and the different things that go into it. Congress writes legislation and the IRS has to provide guidance, and until that happens, it's kind of it's just no one has a clear fact on how the IRS will look at that. So when our investors are purchasing all these tax credits and assuming that the way Congress wrote the tax law is how the IRS will interpret it and enforce it, until that gets more clarity, a lot of them are kind of skittish on underwriting to that. So it's not that we couldn't do that, it's that we don't know if our investors who are buying the tax credits would be open to that, which if we don't have an investor to buy the project, then we don't have a project. So that's why I need to kind of explore that and talk with our investor and see if that's something they would be open to. Obviously, it's 2021, it's 4 years later. So, there's been some guidance issue, but it isn't conclusive enough where all banks are in favor of doing it. In terms of the tranches, you're right, the 60% level is a lower likelihood of getting awarded, but with this being such a small project, a lot of people applying for projects are applying for like $20 million of bonds. This one would be like $7 million. So the thought is, we kind of like the remains of the bonds that would go to this project, just because they'd have X amount left and no one to give them to except our project. So that's kind of why we're looking at this. A lot of people don't do this small amount of units with bond deals, is because there isn't a cap. So why not just build it as big as you can and, kind of spray all those overhead costs amongst less or more units, I guess. But since this site can only be so many units, and since it has to be 60% rents, I think the lower unit count has an advantage to us to maybe get some financing. So that's kind of our thought behind that.
All right, additional questions or comments? All right, go ahead, Commissioner Keneally.
I was looking at the 2040 plan and the zoning for this site, and I believe I saw that this particular site is zoned for medium density and the surrounding sites are zoned for high density. And I was curious why that is.
Do you have more of that backstory?
Now, in terms of the history, I don't quite remember how that came about through the community discussion. So no, I don't have kind of the backstory. I don't know if Julie does.
Well, I would just say that part of why, so there's a lot of existing apartments along 494, and the comp plan and the zoning were sort of designed to match what that, as much as possible, match what that density is. But I think there's a recognition that along 494, a higher density is not unreasonable. We would have to amend the comprehensive plan for this, but because it is an affordable project, that's a 3-vote. Normally, a comp plan requires a supermajority. But so just to make you aware of that, that affordable housing projects have to be looked at differently with comp plan amendments.
All right, other comments or questions? All right, Councilmember Hayford O'Leary.
I don't have a concern with housing here or this size of building. I hear that there might be other sites that would be more ideal, but this seems like a perfectly good site. There's residential directly across 77th and a block east. My only feedback on the site plan as it stands from last time is I would like to see a larger tot lot and less parking. I think there's quite a bit more parking than is required provided. So, and that was a concern I heard about. It's a ways to a playground. It's some concern also from the business owners across the street, across Pillsbury, that people would be using their property or their parking lots for recreation since they wouldn't have enough space on site. So if you can maximize that, given the footprint of the building, I'd like to see that. I'd also like to see an entrance on 77 since we've required that of Honda and Lametries. I also just wanted to clarify with staff, are there any other outstanding proposals for the site besides the parking lot?
Councilmember Hayford O'Leary. No, we do continue to hear some interest from Richfield Bloomington Honda about various proposals. We've made them aware that this is a continuing dialogue we're having with MWF on a housing proposal and did not get any other interest from them. So no.
Okay. I mean, it certainly beats a parking lot on many measures, both for our long-term tax base and for providing these units. So I think this is basically good, and I will defer to the HRA folks on the financing and subsidy.
Did you say an entrance on 77th Street?
Just, I think, given how close that is to the street, if it's just a blank wall of windows and you can't get in anywhere, that might be unwelcoming.
Oh, like a
77th.
walking entrance,
Like
not a.
yeah, like a door,
Got
not
it.
a driveway entrance.
Got
Yeah.
it. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yep.
We do that on projects all the time in more urban settings, so.
All right, Councilmember Troutman.
Thank you, Chair Supple, and thank you for this presentation. I just have a question for staff. I don't know that I have a lot to add specifically. Like our mayor, I'm a little conflicted about kind of the halfwayness of the site that makes it not ideal for most developments, but also supportive of increasing our affordable housing in our community. My question is long-term, the storage business that's adjacent. Hard to argue that that's the highest and best use of that space. I mean, they're of course free to be there as long as they are, but it would seem like there would be an opportunity to redevelop that space. Could you say anything about how it's zoned right now? And is there anything we can do as we look to the future to recognize we do have a mix of housing and commercial and industrial right there? And what is there anything we can do to look forward to what that parcel, that section might be in the future?
So I can speak to the existing comprehensive plan guidance. The 2040 plan does guide that site that you're referring to as high density residential. The current zoning, however, is mixed use, the mixed use community designation. So looking for, I believe that would be 2 acres or more. So there would be a need for, or a vision for more than just residential use. So some component. So that's what the planning and zoning would speak for.
In terms of the economics of the site, I would agree that, at some point in time, property along 494 it has a comparable value of X million per acre, and the mini storage at some point in time will get priced out. I don't know that that's yet, but I think it's on the horizon.
And Director Stark or Miss Urban, is there anything that we could do proactively to ensure that there might be some amenities, especially since it's guided for high density or zone for high density? Is it guided or zoned for high density?
It's guided for high density residential.
So just so I could imagine not pretty easily and not fondly what just putting high density could be. Is there anything that the city could do to proactively look to add amenities and something like that, or we just have to wait for what developers might present?
And you're talking about the storage site? We haven't spoken to the owner in quite a while. I think that would be a reasonable next step to take, would be to talk with that owner and see, what their plans for the future are. Some of the properties to the east, that's a tough nut to crack in its own way because it's a lot of properties used in a variety of ways. But again, at some point in time, the market value of those are going to exceed the current usage, and those folks would want to sell. What it really takes ultimately, though, is a developer seeking that out and saying, we recognize that the value to us is greater than a mini storage and 4 or 5 small kind of semi-industrial uses. And so, like I said, once we've maybe spoken to the mini storage person, a big part of my job is making the rounds in the development community and having those relationships. And certainly, when people talk to me about, well, we're looking for 90 housing units on a 2-acre site, is there anything you can think about? I would talk to them about a site like this, saying, here's a site that's underutilized, and that's something you might want to look at. That's really the extent of our kind of leverage. In terms of a kind of a recurring theme is the site. It's not a great site. I think we all agree on that. And it's always been our philosophy for our sites to overperform, to want to find better uses that are better than the site demands. That's a two-edged sword when it comes to affordable housing, though, because then you're saying, well, wait, we want to have affordable housing on a lesser site, and it doesn't sound the same as saying on any other kind of property. We want a use that's greater than the site. So it is, like I said, a double-edged sword. In terms of the amenities, I agree. Like on the 3-bedroom family units, I'm 100% supportive of family units. I believe that there should be some consideration to have a commensurate kind of family-friendly site, and that will be then incumbent on MWF to show that's the case, that they have all of the facilities, the amenities that would support that many 3-bedroom units and the number of children that you'd expect to see there.
All right, are there additional comments or questions? I was happy to see, given that there's not on-street parking near here, that there's the underground parking and that it's included in the rent, because I know there's been community concerns about that issue, and so I think that's covered. And as Councilmember Hayford-Larry said, if we can increase the tot lot, that'd be great, but I'm glad that we've got the underground parking. And I'm also happy to see the number of 3 bedrooms because we have a severe shortage of that in our community. So I appreciate that. Did we want to have staff sum anything up, or are there any questions we haven't answered?
Well, I would just say to that last point, we've had great success with the kind of the proof of parking way of looking at things. And maybe that would be a solution here, is to set aside some of the surface spaces and say, we're going to dedicate those to a tot lot, but in such a way that we could convert them back to parking in the future if parking demands were greater than the demand for the tot lot space. We always try to sum up next steps, and for the HRA, I think the next steps would be coming back with a development agreement. Usually, we like to break that up into 2 pieces: a preliminary development agreement and a full. I don't think we've had that level of discussion to know whether they would be consolidated or 2 pieces. And then we would come back at some point in time with the public financing. We would come back with the public financing. So as has been discussed, that would be really 3 pieces on this. It would be the TIF, it would be the land write-down, and then the council, with the tax credit, I believe, would have to approve the bonds. And so there would be a 3rd piece to the public financing that we don't normally have. And then finally, the land use approvals would come through the Planning Commission and City Council. And as we've said, it would need a comp plan amendment. The current density allowed in the comp plan, depending on how you round, would be about 36 or 37 units. They're looking for 55 here, so that would require the comp plan amendment. And then ultimately, I have to believe that this would probably be a PUD, so it would go through that process as well.
So one last clarification, does this have to go through the legislative process since it's a bonding issue? Or is that a separate type of thing?
The state gets a certain amount of bonds every year to issue. It's called a volume cap. And those bonds are divvied up into buckets. Some go to Minnesota Housing, some go towards manufacturing, some go to XYZ bucket, some go to Dakota County, Wash County, Minneapolis, St. Paul. And then X of them go to set aside for affordable housing. Basically, it's called a housing pool. And that's determined. I can't remember when that is determined, but you apply for them the 2nd Tuesday of January. And then they receive all of their bonding applicants and they rank them. Preservation is the most top priority, preserving current affordable housing, 30% rents, 50% rents, 60% rents, and like 80% rents. And they just go down the line with how much bonds are requested, who does what priority. If there are ties and only a certain amount of bonds left, they will, I guess, like flip a coin. I'm not sure what their method they use, but it's just random. And then if they don't have enough bonds to fill, like give the remaining bonds to a project, they won't partially allocate it. They have to fully allocate it. So if they have 10 million bonds left and every project needs 20 million and they go down the line to us, we need less than that, they'll give the remaining amount to us. So there's not really like, the legislator doesn't have to approve the funding, I guess. It's already approved and the state just has a amount that they can issue every year.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and as Ryan had said, their application for the bonds would be in January. For that application, they would have to have their local contribution all worked out, or at least as worked out as possible. And so that's why this would be tracked fairly quickly to get all this approved by January. Not on the land use side, just on the development agreement side.
Thank you, that helps with the timeline. Is there any last question before we switch over to the HRA meeting? All right, then we stand adjourned. Thank you.